The restoration of this cobbler's hammer turned out awesome. Stick around and see how it turns out in the end. It was really a fun project to do, nice and quick, and turned out beautiful in my mind. Now, if you haven't already, hit subscribe. You won't be disappointed with the things that will be coming in the future. This hammer was one of 3 hammers that I received along with 4 hatchet heads that I've been restoring in the last few videos. This is actually the second from that set. You can see all of them in here. Just soaking it in a bit of evaporust. I let it sit in the evaporust for 2 days before I pulled all of the axes and the hammers out. With just a quick rinse of water and scrubbing it off, just kind of the goo that ends up being on the outside of the hammer after soaking in evaporust. From this, you can see that the hammer has these lines in it. That's because the hammer is a wrought iron hammer, which is somewhat rare, which actually I didn't know until I posted a few images of it on Instagram, and some of my Instagram followers noticed and educated me. So because of this, I wanted to accentuate these lines that come from wrought iron. I did try soaking it a little longer after a suggestion from a subscriber in vinegar. It didn't seem to make a significant difference. I did let it soak for 3 days in the vinegar, and it really didn't make those lines much more visible. So here I'm actually etching the metal. I've attached the hammer head to a battery charger I have. It's 12 volts, and the positive lead is touching the hammer. The negative lead then I have going to this cotton swab, which is drenched in salt water, and that starts the etching process. And you can see right away, just watching here, you can see the lines coming out and becoming more visible. It was fun to do. It's kind of neat. I did want it to go a little deeper than what I ended up getting here, but I really like how it turned out. So here you can see the lines. They're a little clearer than they were before. I really think they look cool right around the head of the hammer, as you can see here. At this point, I decided I wanted to make part of the hammer shiny and more finished, and the other part of the hammer, I wanted to leave the wrought iron lines on the side. Now you'll notice when I start sanding the head of the hammer, there's a whole lot more sparks. The head of the hammer had what appeared to be another type of metal on the end that made it much harder, probably much higher carbon content, which is why we saw so much more sparks there. You'll see it again here on my smaller belt sander also. Lots of sparks there from the head. So I'm just taking 100 grit sandpaper here. I then take it to 120. I actually took it all the way up to 600 grit. This is just the 220. After I'd done a lot of the sanding, I wanted to clean it up because I thought this hammer would look better if I did the gun blue to it. So I'm just cleaning it up with isopropyl alcohol, trying to get inside the lines so that I can then use this perma blue to blue the whole hammer. I was hoping actually that this bluing would accentuate the wrought iron lines a little more. You'll see what the result really was. So I just followed the directions roughly from what the Perma Blue said to do. I actually did a couple coats of this. After coating it, you let it dry just a little bit, rinse it off in water, and then run a bit of steel wool over it. So I got it good and covered everywhere. Rinsed it off, dried it, and then I just rubbed it down with steel wool. When I was done with this first application of the Perma Blue, it wasn't quite as dark as I wanted, so I went at it for a second time. And I felt like this just looked awesome. But as you can tell, it really didn't accentuate the wrought iron lines, although they are still visible. They weren't accentuated as much as I was hoping. I was hoping that bluing would get down deep into the wrought iron lines. So you can see the mark there. It's a C Hammond hammer, a number 4 or a size 4, which is like 1 pound, 1 ounce on the hammerhead. For the handle, I decided to use this baseball bat that I picked up at the thrift store for $3. I guess it's not a baseball bat, it's a softball bat. And I had assumed that this baseball bat was hickory, but it wasn't until I cut into it here that I could tell it wasn't. And it was actually at this point that I could smell that this was oak. It was white oak. So this baseball bat was a white oak. I haven't used oak before for a tool handle or an axe handle, but I know others that have, and I thought if it was good enough for a softball bat, it's probably going to be fine for this Cobblers hammer. So I continued. And if you haven't seen some of my axe videos already, I like using a hatchet to carve my handles. I've done it this way quite a bit, and it's a natural thing for me. I've done several, and it works. It works for me, and it's kind of fun. It's fun to use your hatchets. Now, the hatchet I'm using here, I did a video restoring a few weeks back. The hammer, I believe it's 100 to 200 years old. If you haven't watched that video, you can watch it. If you go to my channel, you'll be able to see the restoration of that axe head. It was a fun one. So here I'm just drawing out the shape that I want for the handle from the head and then on the sides. I've found that when I make handles, it's best to go to this kind of three-dimensional but blocky format. I get the general shape on both sides, and then I start rounding it from there. And I do know there's other tools that can do the same work. It's maybe a less likelihood of ruining your handle, but I haven't had issues using a hatchet to carve out my handles. I use hatchets to carve spoons, so you would think that I should be able to carve a handle without without ruining much here. When you do carve with a hatchet, though, you do have to be careful with the grain of the wood. You need to pay attention to how it's splitting as you chop, that you don't lose control. So I'm just sanding it up after the shaping was done, just cleaning it up, running it. This is a 120 grit, and I'll hit it with a little bit of 220 before I finish up with the handle. Just cutting the kerf for the wedge. And because it's such a light handle, I wanted to put some Danish oil on it. It's, I think, cherry colored Danish oil. Just gives it a little more color than that white oak had. And then once that dried, I put a layer of oiled linseed oil on it. Just getting some on the wedge before I set it. Now, this is the second hammer I've restored, and both of them really have quite a bit of taper. One wedge isn't sufficient for the hammers. I needed to put the wood wedge in, trim it, and then I needed to put a metal wedge just to fill the gap that's created from the bottom to the top because of the taper that's in that eye. But with that second wedge, it was good and tight in there. Really filled it out with no gaps visible. And that's it. That's it for the hammer. I really liked how it turned out. Again, like and subscribe to my videos, and look for opportunities to give those old things new life. I really feel like this turned out beautiful. Looks great. I'm really happy with kind of the old and the new look that it has. Very happy with the bluing on this hammer. So, look for more videos like this in the future. Click on some of the links and subscribe. Let me know what you think of how I did in the comments. Thanks. Ciao.